The 25th of September 1983. The Maze Prison, Northern Ireland. In the grey, rain-swept landscape 10 miles south of Belfast, Europe's most secure prison stood as a monument to containment and control. On that quiet Sunday afternoon, the maze lost 38 of its most dangerous inmates in a single, audacious stroke. These were not men who scaled towering walls under cover of darkness, or spent months clawing through damp earth in a secret tunnel. Instead, they simply drove out through the front gate, seated inside an ordinary prison food lorry, their escape as bold as it was brilliantly simple. The maze had been purpose-built during the height of the Troubles to hold the hardest core of paramilitary prisoners, Irish Republican Army members and Loyalists alike convicted of the most violent acts the conflict had produced. The sentences handed down were staggering: life terms, 20-year stretches, 30-year marathons of confinement. For many inside those cold concrete wings, the maze was meant to be the final destination, the end of the line, a place where hope died and time stretched into eternity. Yet the men confined there refused to accept the label of common criminals. They saw themselves as soldiers, prisoners of war, and for soldiers, escape was never merely a possibility. It was a sacred duty, a continuation of the fight by other means. Larry Marley, appointed the camp's escape officer, embodied that unyielding spirit. Methodical, obsessive, and visionary, he refused to think small. When others whispered about slipping 5 men out under the radar, Marley pushed back with quiet intensity. Why not 20? Why not 30? Why not 50 or more? Under his direction, a formal escape department took shape inside the prison walls. Intelligence officers were assigned to every block. Their mission clear: watch the guards, learn their rhythms, map every routine, every weakness, every predictable habit. But before any breakout could be attempted, the prisoners faced a fundamental, almost insurmountable obstacle. They barely knew the prison that held them. The authorities had engineered deliberate ignorance. Men were transported in vans with blacked-out windows. Internal views were restricted. The full layout of the camp remained a closely guarded secret, designed to keep every prisoner disoriented and contained. Marley set about dismantling that veil of secrecy with patient determination. Ordnance survey maps were smuggled in from the outside world. Aerial photographs clipped from newspapers were collected and studied like sacred texts. Prisoners fortunate enough to be moved between blocks for hospital visits or workshops committed every corridor, every gate, every fence line to memory. Then Marley took the strategy one step further, ordering his men to volunteer for the most menial tasks: cleaning floors, brewing tea, polishing furniture, anything that would grant them access to corners of the institution normally off-limits. How do you escape from a prison you cannot even see? You make the prison reveal itself to you, inch by inch, day by day. The maze was no ordinary facility. It was a fortress built inside a fortress, a prison within a prison, nestled deep inside a British military base. To reach freedom, an inmate would have to breach multiple concentric layers: cell, wing, block, administrative area, tally lodge, and finally the main gate. Each layer came equipped with its own locks, alarms, armed guards, and surveillance. 36 guard towers ringed the outer perimeter. Soldiers patrolled the walls. Cameras and electronic sensors covered every angle. The British government had boasted openly about the maze's impregnability. Margaret Thatcher herself had pointed to it as living proof that the IRA could be contained, broken, and held. No one, the authorities declared, was ever supposed to walk out of the maze. Yet the designers had made one critical miscalculation. They had constructed the prison to hold individual criminals, lone actors who might attempt solitary, opportunistic escapes. They had not anticipated a population that viewed itself as an organized army, capable of planning, coordinating, and striking with military precision as a single, disciplined unit. And there was something else the intelligence officers discovered through months of quiet observation: a food lorry that traveled freely throughout the entire camp. It entered and exited every block, passed through the main gate without ever being searched. What if 38 men did not need to climb walls or dig tunnels? What if they could simply drive out the front gate in broad daylight, hidden in plain sight? The escape plan had been germinating for 18 long months when the hunger strikes of 1981 altered the atmosphere inside the maze forever. 10 men starved themselves to death in a protest that shook the world. Hatred between guards and prisoners reached toxic, almost unbearable levels. Violence became constant, trust evaporated. Then, in a move that stunned even the men inside the blocks, the IRA leadership issued a startling order. Stand down, be friendly, make tea for the guards, call them by their first names, smile, chat, lower every defense. It was an act, a calculated, deliberate, months-long performance designed for one purpose only: to erode the guards' vigilance until it crumbled. Some guards genuinely believed they had finally broken the prisoner's spirit. Others remained suspicious at first, but weeks turned into months, and suspicion slowly faded. The steel grill doors that regulations demanded stay locked began to remain open for practical reasons. Prisoners who had no official business in the control rooms suddenly found themselves standing inside them, handing out cups of tea with disarming politeness. In H Block 7, the block destined to become the epicenter of the escape guards actually invited prisoners into the circle to help clean and polish. The heavy wooden security door, meant to stay shut, was left ajar for ventilation. The padlocked grill was unbolted. Prisoners moved freely through the nerve center of the block, all while appearing cooperative and harmless. They were not being friendly. They were mapping every alarm point, every communication device, every hidden vulnerability with the precision of cartographers. Bobby Story, one of the key escape leaders, studied the circle in H Block 7 like a general poring over battlefield maps. He memorized the exact position of every telephone, every panic button, every camera blind spot. He knew which guards rotated through the control room and which ones posed the greatest risk of resistance. One name in particular haunted their planning: John Adams. Of the 5 or 6 regular controllers, Adams was the one they believed would fight back if given the chance. On the morning of the 25th of September 1983, Bick McFarland checked the duty roster with a sinking feeling. Adams was on duty in the control room. Of all the days, of all the possible guards, fate had placed their most dangerous opponent exactly where he could do the most damage. But the plan was locked in. Guns had already been smuggled into the block by the IRA leadership outside. How exactly those weapons arrived remains a secret the organization has never publicly revealed. Once the firearms were in place, confidence inside the block surged dramatically. The escape would take place on a Sunday, when the prison operated at minimal staffing levels. No visits, no workshops, no football matches. The entire facility observed something close to a religious hush. 38 men would go. 12 would wear stolen guard uniforms. The rest would ride in the back of the hijacked food lorry. Jerry Kelly would lie across the floor of the cab, a gun pressed firmly against the driver's stomach. The operation required seizing the entire block in 90 seconds, holding it in total silence while the lorry arrived, then driving past every checkpoint to the main gate. One mistake, one raised alarm, one guard reaching for a panic button, and the whole plan would collapse in bloodshed. At the appointed hour, McFarlane, Kelly, Tony Mullen, and Brendan McFarlane, all orderlies with legitimate reasons to be in the circle, entered the area. McFarlane gave the signal with a single, quiet code word: bumper. Bobby Story immediately called out that he needed the floor polisher. The 90-second countdown had begun. The team burst into the room where 4 guards were gathered. Guns were drawn and cocked with deliberate loud clicks so the sound of real weapons would leave no doubt. Get down on the ground. This is an IRA operation. If you move, you will be shot. If you do exactly as you're told, you won't be hurt. The guards complied. The takeover rippled outward through the block like a stone dropped into still water. Every wing was secured almost simultaneously. But in the control room, John Adams seized a fleeting opportunity. A guard emerged unexpectedly from the women's toilets, a blind spot the planners had missed. Adams lunged for the opaque security door and slammed it shut. Kelly fired twice. One round struck Adams above the eye. He collapsed, unconscious for roughly 30 seconds. When he regained consciousness, bleeding heavily, Kelly stood over him. "What did you do that for?" Kelly asked. Adams, dazed, replied, "I don't know. I'm sorry. I just don't know. Remarkably, the two shots were not heard outside the block. The entire facility was now under IRA control. Guards were bound with hands behind their backs, tied to one another, pillowcases pulled over their heads. Uniforms were stripped from the 12 men previously identified. Republican prisoners changed into guard clothing. A calm statement was read aloud in every canteen. This is an IRA operation. We are not here for revenge. We are not here to punish you for the hunger strikes. But if you interfere with this escape, you will be dealt with swiftly. The food lorry arrived precisely on schedule. Driver David McLaughlin was approached with guns drawn and informed that the block was under Republican control. He was under arrest, brought into the medical room where maps were pinned to the walls, ammunition laid out on tables, and firearms deliberately displayed. McLaughlin did something extraordinary. He began correcting the maps. "That turn you've marked," he said calmly. "It's actually 40 yards further down. I'm showing you so you don't think I'm driving somewhere wrong and overreact." He had chosen full cooperation. 38 men climbed into the back of the lorry one by one, some still in prison clothes, 12 now dressed as guards. The space was cramped, shoulder to shoulder. No one spoke. The tailboard was lifted and the shutter pulled down. Total darkness. The faint smell of old bread and engine oil filled the metal box. 38 hearts beat in silence. Jerry Kelly lay across the cab floor beneath the driver's legs, gun pressed to McLaughlin's stomach. The lorry pulled out of the block, turned left, then left again toward the exit. 3 gates stood between them and freedom. The first gate opened. A guard called up casually, "All right, Davy, how's it going?" The hydraulic barrier rose. They passed the second gate, the administration checkpoint. Then came the tally lodge, the final barrier, the place where guards clocked in and out, the last obstacle between 38 men and the open Irish countryside. Disaster nearly struck here. The escape team was already 15 to 20 minutes behind schedule, and they arrived exactly as the shift change was occurring. The tally lodge suddenly flooded with prison officers coming on and off duty. Dozens of guards filled the space. The armed prisoners found themselves surrounded by a sea of uniformed staff. Tension thickened the air until it felt almost solid. Then the phone rang. Silence fell like a blade. No one moved. The senior officer was brought to the phone with 2 pistols pressed to his head. "Answer it," they ordered. "One wrong word and it will be your last." The call was from the emergency control room. An alarm had been triggered in the tally lodge. One of the bound guards had activated a hidden panic button beneath the television set. The prisoners watched as guards near the television instinctively inched away, revealing the button's exact location. The senior officer was told to reset the alarm. This was his moment, his one chance to send a silent signal. He asked the voice on the other end, "How do you reset the alarm?" Everyone in the room froze. The question was absurdly obvious. Every guard knew how alarms worked. Every prisoner knew. It was a blatant cry for help. The man on the other end paused, then snapped, "Push it back in, you stupid bastard," and hung up. The signal had failed completely. The senior officer turned deathly white, the color draining from his face as he realized no one had understood his desperate attempt. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Too many guards, too little time. The tension had become unbearable. Then, without warning, everything exploded into chaos. No one ever knew who threw the first punch, but suddenly the tally lodge became the scene of a full-scale brawl. Guards and prisoners, many in identical uniforms, fought viciously in the cramped space. 5 officers were stabbed. A British soldier watching from an observation post only 10 yards away saw only men in uniform fighting one another and chose not to intervene. Bobby Story shouted the final order. "Everybody go now." Someone tried to open the main gate but could not. Guards drove 2 cars forward to block the lorry's exit. The vehicle was trapped. Story gave the command to open the back. 35 prisoners poured out and sprinted for the perimeter fence. 3 men turned with pistols to hold the guards at bay while the rest climbed. One pursuing guard was shot in the leg but kept running for a moment before stopping. It was every man for himself. They scaled the fence and spilled into open fields and countryside 10 miles from Belfast. For the first time in years, there were no walls, no bars, no locks, No guards, only grass beneath their feet and the sound of their own ragged breathing under the open sky. Within hours, the largest manhunt in the history of the Troubles swung into motion. Helicopters thundered across the sky. Roadblocks appeared on every major route. The Royal Ulster Constabulary and British Army mobilized in force. That evening, the news broke across Northern Ireland and beyond. Mass escape from the maze. A prison officer killed. More than 20 Republicans on the run. The British government was humiliated. The Secretary of State called it the most serious incident in prison history. Margaret Thatcher was incandescent with rage. An official inquiry was launched immediately. Of the 38 who escaped, 10 were recaptured that first night, including Bobby Story and 2 companions found hiding submerged to their necks in a river, heads concealed behind reeds along the bank. But 28 remained free. Vic McFarlane's group made it deep into the countryside. They hid in barns, walked fields by night, followed railway tracks south toward the border. For 3 or 4 days, they moved from 8 in the evening until 4 or 5 in the morning, sleeping in hedges and ditches during daylight. One dawn, McFarlane sat in a field listening to birdsong on a small radio tuned to the 7 o'clock news. The contrast hit him like a wave. Yesterday, he had been inside Europe's most secure prison. Today, he was free, breathing open air, listening to birds. Is this real? He thought. This is amazing. They eventually reached a nationalist area in South Armagh and were taken to a safe house just 200 or 300 yards from the border. McFarlane's group then hid for 2 weeks in an arms dump beneath the floorboards, 2 tiny rooms connected by a crawl space. No room to sit up, no room to turn without hitting rafters. They lay flat. Coffee jars served as toilets. A radio with an earpiece was their only link to the outside world. Every bulletin led with the escape. The smell of unwashed bodies in the sealed, unventilated space became almost unbearable. Yet they stayed because soldiers were searching every house on the street above. Jerry Kelly's group reached a housing estate in Lurgan. Kelly burst into the home of a former comrade who was sitting on his sofa. "It's Jerry Kelly," he announced. "We've just escaped from the H blocks." The man nearly fell off the furniture. "What? It hasn't even been on the news yet." Kelly and McFarlane eventually crossed into the Republic of Ireland. Many escapees lived undercover in rural Ireland for months before flying to continental Europe on false passports in January 1984. Life on the run was lonely and relentlessly paranoid. In cities like Amsterdam and Paris, they could walk streets, eat in restaurants, visit cinemas, yet they had no real friendships, no genuine identity. They were faces no one knew, surrounded by people they could never fully trust. Every day demanded the same rituals: watch over your shoulder, check for surveillance, vary your routes. A single car accident or routine police check could end everything. For Kelly, the strangest moment of freedom came at an ordinary pedestrian crossing. Standing at a traffic light, pressing the button, waiting to cross, the realization washed over him. I'm out. I'm free. It was nothing dramatic, just a mundane street corner, yet the overwhelming sense that no one was watching him anymore felt profound. Luck, however, eventually ran its course. Dutch security services located them. How exactly, neither man has ever fully explained. Kelly would only say it was wrong. At 5 o'clock one morning, the windows of their apartment exploded inward with stun grenades. Armed officers swarmed in. Kelly woke to a machine pistol in his mouth. His first thought was that it was a bomb. Then he heard Dutch voices and felt an odd wave of relief. Dutch police, not British soldiers. He was still alive. The extradition process moved slowly through the courts. On the 4th of December 1986, Kelly was flown back to Northern Ireland and returned to the very same H-block wing he had escaped from. The block security officer, who had been on duty the day of the breakout, stood waiting in the circle to welcome him back. They walked him down the same corridor to the same kind of cell. The message was clear: bring him back to where it started so he will never try it again. One prison officer, James Ferris, died during the melee at the Tally Lodge. 5 others were injured. John Adams, shot in the control room, survived his wounds. The official Hennessy report that followed was devastating in its conclusions. It exposed catastrophic failures in security procedures and a culture of complacency that the prisoners had deliberately cultivated over many months. Doors that should have remained locked were left open. The food lorry that should have been searched was waved through without question. The escape humiliated the British government and shattered forever the myth of the maze as an impregnable fortress. To this day, the 1,983 Maze prison escape remains the largest jailbreak in the history of the United Kingdom. 38 men, one food lorry, one ordinary Sunday afternoon, and a long, quiet campaign of carefully served cups of tea that, one by one, opened every door. It proved what Larry Marley had always believed: think big, always think big.